Thank you guys. Wow, these things these people have been smart up here. So many amazing things. I hope I can remember what I was going to talk about. I want to go out and like volunteer and climb rocks and tie shoes, and I mean, wow, heady stuff. So before I get going, I have to give you just a really quick preface on the ground rules here, which is. When I get excited about things, I tend to talk really fast, and I'm actually very excited about this kind of stuff, so I'm going to go really fast. But the problem is I'm not going to know it, just thanks to the free refills of soda here. I'm like 40% caffeine and 30% aspartame by volume right now. So I'm going to get going a little fast, and I would just say raise your hand or wave your arms around if I get talking a little fast and you just need to tell me to slow down or give me like an owl bird call or something. I'll get the message and I'll figure it out. So I'm going to be talking at a normal pace, but I'm actually going really, really fast. So. The other thing to really know about me is despite this sort of idea that newspaper editors are supposed to be stodgy and sort of stalwart people, I tend to not take myself very seriously. So if we crack a few jokes, have a good time, don't worry about it. It's all in good fun. And as a preview to the end of the presentation, in the end, the story really all comes down to an 8-foot-tall inflatable giant chicken and its insights. So we're going to get to the end, and that will make a little bit of sense, but I figured I'd put the breadcrumb at the beginning like any good Christopher Nolan movie, so you can, at the end, you can go, oh, I see what he's talking about. So the very notion of this thing, the topic is the geography of information, and then the information of geography, which, is a cute little play on words, but the two things are entirely different topics that are really like two sides of the same coin, but entirely separate things. And it's a heady concept, but we're going to try and sort of boil it down one step at a time. So I guess I want to start by talking about the terms that I mean here. So we're talking about the geography of information. What is the geography of information? Information has a connectedness. As a kid, I was very obsessed with the interconnectedness of devices. We get a new device in the house, and obviously everything's got a power plug, and it's two things, and it plugs into the wall and makes things go. But there's ports on things, as a kid, there was this weird sort of sadness to me when we'd get a device, and there'd be some bizarre-looking proprietary port on the end of it that had a funny, 6 pins or a funny little triangle shape or something, because to me that recognized an unrealized potential. But at the same time, there were ports in common. And like any really nerdy kid, I grew up with one of those in the house. Some of you guys had one of those, a good old RCA VHS camcorder. You get like a shoulder injury after using it for a few minutes. And, it had this little proprietary port on the side, and I could never figure out why it had that. But on the back, there was those, they were called RCA plugs, And I used to notice, hey, the stereo has those too. Everything else has those. Maybe you can plug them in together and something would happen. And it did. You could take the signal from your video camera and put it live on the TV. How cool is that? And then I thought, oh my gosh, the back of my computer has one of those too. I can plug it into nothing happened. Well, that's really weird. And, I couldn't figure out why those two things would be there, and yet the devices couldn't talk to each other. And then I realized that maybe sometimes you needed an intermediary. So I went to Radio Shack. I was like 10-year-old, I bought one of these little stereo mixers. I'd saved up weeks of allowance for that. And all of a sudden, using the intermediary device, those things could talk to each other. So I could play video games and then overdub the Top Gun soundtrack and make these really awesome little compilations, or do little video subtitles using audio dubbing capabilities of that. So sometimes it just takes the right intermediary to get two things to be able to communicate. So there's this connectedness between all of our information sources out there. Kind of put on a less theoretical level, in news, we talk about what makes a good story. And so we have these sort of axes that we talk about, just timeliness and prominence. And what that really means is if I tell you, hey, oh my gosh, there's a 3-car pileup crash, you go, oh, that's interesting, when did it happen? If I say, well, it's happening right now, you go, whoa, it's happening right now, that's fascinating. If you say, when did it happen? And I say, oh yeah, it happened like 3 weeks ago. You go, well, why are you telling me now? What's the point of that? And so really the further away that something gets from when it initially happens, the more prominent it has to be interesting. Like if I say there was a 27 car pileup out, and it happened a week ago, you might go, whoa, 27 cars, that's a big deal. So even though it happened a week ago, the notion that it was a bigger story gives it still some value. And so that's kind of been rattling around in news world for, decades. But I started thinking about it too in terms of a third axis. So you take this third axis of timeliness, prominence, and then you add proximity to that. And you get this, well, what you really get, I think, is sort of like a scene from Tron. But if you look at this sort of as a three-axis thing, you can start saying things like, okay, 3-car pileup. When did it happen? Oh, it happened like a week ago. Where did it happen? Well, it happened right out here, and you go, oh, I know this place. This is my place. This is my town. I get that. If I tell you there was a 3-car pileup, it happened a week ago, and it was in, I don't know, suburban Los Angeles, I don't care. But if it happened here on this street, it becomes more interesting. The further away you get from that, it plots lower on the axis unless the thing was bigger. So, when I talk about the geography of information through this presentation, I'll be talking about it and sort of know that there's a connectedness between the proximity, the prominence, the timeliness of all of these things. So that's the geography of information. When we turn it on its head and we talk about the information of geography, this one's a lot easier to get and a lot less, sort of metaphysical out there. Information of geography is kapow. It's you are here. It's the stuff that happens around you, the stuff that happens in this room, on this block, in our communities. It is the information around where we live. And that's in jeopardy today. And it's part of why I'm up here to talk today. So why is it a big deal? Well, how many of you guys ever used like IRC back in the 90s? Yep, see a handful. I love that stuff. It was great. Before IRC, we had BBSs even. These bulletin board systems are out there. Yeah, I know, okay, old school. BBSs out there, and a lot of those were organized around geography. I remember being in high school, and we were part of this educational service unit, and this was sort of pre-internet, and there was geography based around these bulletin board systems for central Nebraska or this part of the country or that part of the country. But when we really started moving onto the internet, we lost the notion of information by geography and started to go with information by ideology. So you didn't get together online with people from your neck of the woods. You got together with people who liked Star Trek or people who, I don't know, had big toes. I don't know what it is, but you got together around communities of shared interests. And even on some of the first web pages, you'd have things like, remember GeoCities, right? Well, I mean, look at how, I know, it was my first website, it was on GeoCities. And 34 neighborhoods, and here's the neighborhood directory and profile, our homesteaders. They organized these things by Area 51, these places, Baja, but they were all sort of ideological based places, yet they took a real world manifestation. And that crossing of wires, this mixture of we're going to take the internet and make it like the real world, except without that pesky convenience of the people around you, it's causing a problem. And, you can now completely live in these self-contained bubbles where you can surround yourself with people who are just like you, who think just like you do. How many of you have seen, things in your Facebook feed back during the election? You're like, oh, I'm sick of that person because they're always posting stuff that disagrees with my worldview. Unfriend. They may have been a good high school friend, they may have been something, but you get so annoyed at that. So you surround yourself with entirely conservative or entirely liberal points of view when it comes to news. Oh, doesn't that feel better? Doesn't that feel better and more comforting to be surrounded by people who think just like you? And that extends past news, too. You can live in entire vampire communities of ideology online, or classic cars, or furries, or if you're a guy and you like My Little Pony, great, you can be a brony and live in that entire world of that. I still don't get that one. But you can surround yourselves with these people who are only like you, and it's comforting, and it feels good. There is no cognitive dissonance in that. And that creates a problem for us. So, given that I have all this kind of crazy, heady information, connectedness knowledge, and I'm really nervous about us separating into these communities of ideology, it kind of, makes sense that I would get into newspapers. And so just as a sort of a quick segue, I want to get into the really quick background of that. I was born in Nebraska, grew up in Michigan and Virginia, and my parents dragged me kicking and screaming as a teenager back to Michigan, or Nebraska at 17, and went to college there, got my first newspaper job there. And my wife and I took newspaper jobs out in South Carolina, which was really where this idea started gelling for me of these two separate concepts. Because out in Myrtle Beach, you have two different types of people. You got the people who live there, and they're very concerned with the world around them. And then the people who are very concerned with the world where they live, and they come on vacation, the snowbirds. And this was really before mass internet adoption. It was out there, but it was just for kind of us nerds. And so we started thinking about what can we do, what sorts of things can we do to bring people in from outside to get them interested in this interconnectedness of information. We can't give them news about Myrtle Beach's city council, they don't care. So we give them news about some other things. And really started thinking about that. And then from there, we moved back to Nebraska because, we were getting far from home. We wanted to be close to home, so we took newspaper jobs there and really remembered, maybe we really don't want to be that close to our family. So we took newspaper jobs out in Utah, thoroughly loved the mountains, fell in love with the mountains, fell in love with the spirit of the West. I loved it, wanted to run my own newsroom, went up to Idaho. Feeling a little far away from the family, and it was about that time where we would meet all the time right in between, Salt Lake City and Nebraska. And where was that? That was Fort Collins, Colorado. It was a dead on halfway spot. And my wife and I fell in love with this town. I thought, oh my gosh, if we could live here like someday before we die, how cool would that be? And sure enough, the right opportunity opened up. And so we kind of settled halfway. And so just by my way of saying it, this was a very sort of deliberate decision to try all these experiments of the information of geography and geography of information, all this stuff right here in this community. And I'll talk to you about why in a little bit. So again, the newspaper stuff, very into that. But setting that aside for a second, some people might say, what's the big deal with these communities of ideology online? Why can't we just be happy being around people who are like us, and you can go live in vampire community, I am a brony world, and totally be okay with that? Why is it a big deal that we care about what is going on around us and in our communities? Well, you say the word city council, and instantly you lose like 95% of people's attention spans. City council, whatever. They do, I don't know what they do, city council-y stuff. But I was thinking about this, and in the past just few months here, city council's done all sorts of things that affect the way we live. Mandatory cardboard recycling, based on our actions and based on the people we voted, or in this case, didn't entirely turn out to vote for. We all recycle cardboard now as of March 15th. It's required. And maybe that's a great thing for us. Maybe some people don't like that. But these are the people who are deciding this for us, these local things around us. We decided as a community, because these are the people we voted for, not to put a fee on plastic bags in stores. That was up and it was shot down. We banned fracking within the city limits of Fort Collins. These are all things in just the past few months. We gave a lot of money for a company to expand, Woodward, to expand their facility in town. We're about to potentially give an even bigger chunk of money to revamp a mall. These are things that come out of our pocketbooks. They come out of our time. They affect the way we live. That's a big deal. Of course, it's still government sort of thing. So what else is there about this community, and why should we care? I mean, there are all sorts of things that pull us together around a community. There are disasters. There are fires. There are horrible things like that. There are happy things that pull us together in community, music events. There are trends and things in our, in our beer industry and how that's changing. There's the way we get around our community. There's the restaurants we go to and the places that we eat. And there's crime, and there's, all sorts of things that are being done to affect our quality of life and public safety. And these are things you cannot solve and you cannot fix if you're part of a community of ideology and not one of geography. So it's a big deal that we care about this stuff. However, it's not enough that we tell people, because newspapers for years have been telling people, this is important stuff. You should care about this stuff. And people go, yeah, I'm gonna go to my brony website instead. So it's not just enough to say, you should care about this stuff. We actually have to figure out how to, and this is not just about newspapers, this is about all of us as a community, how to make people care. And thanks to talking with a lot of smart people out there in the business and in our company and beyond, we're starting to do a little more thinking about how people process information. We sort of come up with 3 really big ways that our brains are being sort of programmatically rewired by our smartphones and the computers and the stuff that we use to think differently. We are now thinking like our devices instead of using our devices to think. And what we've discovered is people sort of do these 3 things, which is highlights, spurts, and guided explorations. If you're looking at highlights, think about the way you guys use your smartphones. You roll out of bed in the morning, sometimes even before your feet hit the floor, you check your phone real quick, you slide through the little notifications, and you go, okay, 1, the world hasn't exploded. 2, I didn't miss any calls from my boss. And 3, I got a couple emails. Okay, I'm fine, good, it's time to go take a shower. Or you look through and you go, heck, I got 4 calls from my boss, I'm in deep trouble. So you're looking at highlights. You're not looking for very specifics, you're just looking to see what you missed. The other option, the way people look for information, is what we call spurts, which is spurts are where you don't need a lot of information. You just need one piece, but it has to be the right piece. An example of that is if you're working on your kitchen sink. I was doing this yesterday, and I didn't get the little tap thing turned off all the way when I was replacing the faucet, and it starts leaking. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what do I do? I was lucky enough to turn the handle off, but if I turned the handle off and it didn't work, I only need one piece of information right then. I don't need to know how many people died in whatever tragedy around the world or whether there was a car pileup or not. I need to know how to make the water stop coming out of my sink. So spurts are when you have one piece of information that has to be focused on. And then guided exploration is sort of the role that is traditionally filled by magazines and the like, where you sit down and you want to actually read and you want to learn a little bit more about something. And next thing you know, it's like 4 o'clock and you're looking at, the history of the universe on Wikipedia and you wonder how on earth you got there. So those three sort of ways is how people process information. And sort of going beyond that, there's sort of when you process the information, there are certain things that make you more interested in it than others. Buzz, people, and interests. So buzz are things people are talking about in the community, in the world, whatever. And that could be the legalization of marijuana, it could be North Korea, it could be the daily commute traffic. It doesn't have to be serious stuff. People, obviously, are people. They're your friends, they're your grandkids, they're famous people like Anderson Cooper, maybe it's the babysitter you hired. They're just people you know. Interests, obviously, are things that interest you. Skiing, retirement, science fiction, whatever it is, they're just things that interest you. And what we have really discovered is that all of those things make for interest, but obviously the stuff of the most interest occurs at where those things combine on that little Venn diagram. So Hurricane Sandy, it's a big deal. It's a bigger deal if you know somebody who lives there. You may love food. Food may be a great interest. At the same time, it's more interesting to you if you know a person who went to a particular place. And likewise, if you have an Apple device in your pocket, you're more interested in the story about Apple stock, and what's happening there and whether people say they can or can't innovate. So we're really looking at how people come up with information based on where they fit in those little Venn diagrams of overlap. Has anybody heard of the term the monkey sphere? It's kind of a weird term. Dunbar's number is sort of the way the grown-ups like to talk about the monkey sphere. And Dunbar's number is this sort of social theoretical number that tracks how many people we can really keep track of and care about at any given point in time before everyone else sort of becomes faceless masses. And that's a big deal because back then, way back in our past, that was our social grooming circle. Those are the people who like sort of pick nits out of our hair and all this stuff. And today that takes the form of social media. And that number really is about 150, it's anywhere from around 100 to around 200. So they kind of round it off. About 150 people is about all that we can really care about and track and think about at any given time. Why is that a big deal? It's because, many, many years ago, that 150 people was only really important for picking the nits out of our hair. And today those 150 people are our sources of information. They're the people who tell us what's going on in the world, what's going on in the community. That's how we learn from our network of people. And I'm going to tell you why that's really important in a minute and why that's really alarming. So flipping it back for a second now, back to this notion of the information, of geography. Newspapers used to occupy this space. Newspapers, magazines, television, call them the old world media field, used to occupy this space of snapping you out of your comfort zone, teaching you things you didn't know, getting you to feel some cognitive dissonance. But we got lazy, and we did it wrong. So I wanted to kind of recap where we went wrong. Well, the biggest reason we went wrong is we were pretty sure newspapers were always going to be around. That was a piece, we could have all the greatest technology in the world and magical fax devices that whenever you read them, what would they be used for? Well, to print newspapers, of course. Why on earth would you have this magical technology if it wasn't to print out more newspapers? I mean, heaven forbid something went onto a screen or, went into a device in your pocket or anything like that. It would obviously print newspapers. The other reason that we got complacent is that little guy right there. Those little classifieds, newspapers decided nothing could ever come along that would take that away from us. That was just a license to print money. So as a result, in the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, we got very, very complacent. We decided that as an industry, we could just sit around and just let the cash keep rolling in. We didn't have to innovate. We didn't really have to do much of anything in particular. It would happen. And as we saw, that didn't happen. We were cocky. We were an industry that had survived radio. They said radio would kill newspapers. Well, obviously it didn't. And they said, television will kill newspapers. Everyone will watch and nobody will read. Obviously it didn't. And so when computers came along, the industry said, obviously we can deal with a couple geeks in their parents' basement. What's the worst that could possibly happen, right? We shrugged off everything else. Well, we saw how that worked out. And the other thing that really happened is as a result of that, we got very slow to move, very slow to adapt, and we separated ourselves from the community. Think about the whole Woodward Bernstein era. You have a whole bunch of journalists trained in that notion of we're above the community. We can be better than the community. We can tell the community what we think they should know, not what they should know. And as a result, we thought that made us these sort of cool, grizzled journalists, but the public looked at us and said, no, you're distant. You're separated from the community. You think you're being impartial, but you're just being sort of snobbish and foppish. And we really became like these robots and, interchangeable things out there that robots with press passes on their heads. Because, nobody really thought much about who these people were, what they cared about, and vice versa. There was just no communication back and forth. So it's really telling to me that people left. They left traditional forms of media in exchange for their networks, in exchange for the people that they cared about, the people that they relied upon, and the people that they trusted on a personal level. It became not about institutions, but not about people. And that's where we find ourselves today. And so I'm thinking about this notion and how to fix that, and what happens if you take this information of geography, which is the information around us, and the geography of information, which is how people think, and combine those together here in a town like this. And you get this notion of coming together as a community. And what happens if you take this stuff and take this awareness, this information, and use it for good and make people really smart about the world around them? And I think we can do that. And without getting into a big pitch for what we do, how do you do that? You listen to people. You listen to what people want. For years and years and years, newspapers did not. Media did not. Television, magazines, they said, this is what you will have, and this is what we will give you because it's what we've decided is important. We look at everything people look at now, and we figure out if we have a really important story and nobody read it, we go, well, what did we do wrong? A, did people not care? Or B, did we not tell them in the right way it was important enough? So we track this stuff. We look at what people are reading in our newsroom every minute of every day. We track readership. We look at Twitter. Any tweet made in northern Colorado, we look at and we process that. We look at where people are coming from. We look at what reporters are resonating with the community. And we don't do that as a scientific formula to boil things down, but we do that as a way of figuring out what it is, what questions a community wants answered. And that's a bizarre concept for people in old media who are used to defining the questions themselves. We also do it by kind of kiboshing this notion that we have to be dispassionate and separate from the community. Without reading this to you, we have a reporter who's very interested in what she does. And she talks about, in the top of the story, yesterday, many of you reading this, this was a Thanksgiving thing, sat down at a table full of turkey. She talks about a lot of you went shopping and fought for deals. While you were doing all of this, my friend Riley was trying to find a place to set up camp and stay warm. He was sharing the few snacks he'd been able to find with others. My friend Riley? Oh my gosh, a journalist. They're not allowed to have friends, much less have friends that they write about. We are turning that notion on its ear because this person, this reporter, was moved by this situation. And the traditional rules of journalism says, don't let yourself be moved. And we've gone the other way and say, be moved. Be part of the community. It's okay. We talk to each other. This is not just about the newspaper. This is about a community talking to one another with us as a part of it. Here's a very typical thing. When I first got to the paper, there were hundreds of questions on our Facebook wall, people saying, what about this? What about that? And nobody ever answered them. So now when people have comments, we answer them. Here's someone who lobbed a hand grenade saying, Neener, I don't like what you did. And I responded, and the person said, thanks for the response. Wasn't expecting one. And the words right after that, I agree. Here was a person who lobbed a hand grenade. The person came back, and you found a common ground. The whole discussion got richer because of this interaction. People ask questions, we answer questions. There's lots of police. Oh my gosh, what's going on? We facilitate that as a community. We have other people in the community saying, I saw this, did you see that? And people trading back and forth information. It doesn't have to come through a major media organization. We're happy to be the brokers of it, but it can come from each other as a way of informing the discussion. So the other thing we're doing, and some of you may have seen some of these signs around, and I talked about the monkey sphere, and I talked about Dunbar's number and those things. People rely on people for information these days. They don't necessarily rely on sources. So our goal is to let you know, these are who the people are. You can talk with them. They can give you the answers. We have an entire room full of people whose entire job in life now is not to tell you what we think we should tell you, but it's to answer questions. And then we started thinking more deeply about this, and we thought, okay, I think we have the wrong idea, which is for years and years and years, we have thought of what we do as creating products in the media, not just newspapers, but in all of the media. We create products, we make things, and you buy things. What happens if we turn that on its ear, and instead of the product being the function, it's the person? And we think of what we do as a service, which is we don't make stuff for you, we answer questions. Let's answer your questions. We have people who have all these hours, they're sitting there in the day, we just all put them to work answering the questions that you guys have. So we think of them as a service. And what happens if you take that to its logical conclusion and take newspapers out of the equation? What does that look like? And so we're prototyping something that, actually we start prototyping this tomorrow. tentatively called the Answerizer, which I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what it's going to be like in the end. But what happens when you take newspapers out of newspapering and come up with just a tool to answer questions? You have a question. We have 30 people who are really good at finding answers to questions. Let us find the ones you want, and we share those with others. And so our goal is to take this notion of journalism from product to service and create something entirely new. So, there's sort of desktop and mobile components to that both. In the end, this is really the right place to do this. I've thought about this a lot. I've talked to the community a lot. I think that Fort Collins, Colorado, like everybody knows, is this ridiculously smart place. It's an invested place. I saw a tweet as I was looking on the tweet stream here, and somebody said, gosh, thanks TEDx and thanks, Avogadro's number for fostering intelligence in Fort Collins. But it's more than intelligence. It's about fostering knowledge. I think we can foster knowledge here. This is the right time to do this. As you get out there and you see the devices in people's pockets, you see the interconnectedness of a community, trading information back and forth. Can we seize on the intelligence of the community and also seize upon our propensity for knowledge? So we're not just making gut-level smart people decisions, we're making gut-level smart people informed decisions. I think we can do it. And I think it's a phenomenal place. And I think that movement really starts with the invested people who come to things like this, who are in these rooms, whether it's here, whether it's the CSU TEDx, or whether it's the one down in Loveland. I think that these sort of places are the perfect place to start movements like this. And I guess I would end by bringing you back to the chicken, which now you guys are going, what about the chicken? What's the deal with the chicken? Well, here's the deal with the chicken. I asked our reporters to quit being so dispassionate and quit being above the community, but be a part of the community. Go out, talk to people, but also just observe people. Listen to them. Look at how people interact and see what questions people have and see how they talk with each other. And I thought, well, I'm not very good at that if I don't follow my own advice. And so inside that giant inflatable chicken was me. I spent the better part of a day inside of our, that's our little deal mascot for the paper. I spent the better part of a day in there just sort of observing people, walking around. I learned a few things being inside of there. One, I learned that people treat you differently when you're an 8-foot inflatable chicken. I learned that you never, ever approach a pack of middle school boys when dressed as an inflatable chicken, and I learned that people. I learned that no matter what you look like on the inside of there, when someone poses and takes your picture with you, you smile every time, no matter what is inside that suit. But I also learned in walking around and just listening to people when they didn't know that they were being observed. People are so invested in this place. This is the perfect place with which to tie together these two concepts of the geography of information and then the information of our geography, where we live today, to not just create something interesting, not just create a newspaper. It's something much, much bigger. I think we could potentially save an industry, but more importantly, change the way we interact with each other as citizens. I think that's my goal, and I hope with all of us together, we can collectively set out to create something better as a community and inform each other with the place around where we live. So thank you guys so much. It's been a huge honor. I appreciate it.